We are here now right at the start, and our agenda now for today is set up the Python project and the virtual environment, and use this environment to create the first API endpoint, then test it endpoint, test it manually, run the API application, and probably add couple more endpoints, and finally add a Redis resource as a service running in the background that we can address in our logic of our application that requires some database to manage its state. Last time I ended up with the decision to create a Python API for the quiz application. I'll be using PyCharm IDE. It's cool with Python, but it's pretty awkward with JavaScript and HTML. I'll start from scratch. I'll create a directory for my project, open this directory in PyCharm, but won't let the PyCharm create the necessary environment for my Python development. I'll do it myself. As soon as I open the project directory, PyCharm automatically created for me the main.py file. I don't need this file, but let's leave it for now. Later on, we'll add some actual code to start our fast API web server. Yes, I'll be using fast API as I just mentioned, and actual web server that will host this API will be gUnicorn. We'll be using the fast API, and this will be one of the external dependencies we'll include in our project. We'll need more libraries as well, like gUnicorn or the library to support Redis. And now I should decide which version of Python I should stick to, because I'll be downloading libraries, and the libraries I'm downloading should correspond, the version should correspond to the version of the Python I use globally. Or not globally, but locally, because in my operating systems I may have many versions of Python and many dependencies. That would be a mess. So ideally, I need a local Python isolated environment for my project. For managing Python locally in my projects, I am using pyenv. I'm going to use this version of Python to create a virtual environment. And again, pyenv would show me the path to the Python executable. I need this executable to find the version of Python and to create the virtual environment. Did this command. Now I'm going to use this command to actually create a virtual environment. For this very version. That's it, I believe. No, I need also a directory where the virtual environment files will be placed. Let's check. I should see it on the left pane, yes, of my project. Here is the virtual environment. But initially, for not having problems in future with the files I don't want to see in my GitHub repository, I would add gitignore file, and first and foremost, I would add venv to the gitignore file. Now I'm going to activate my virtual environment, and here I will create and install the dependencies required starting from fast API. While it's updated, yes, the update is finished. Let me check if I am able to add the fast API library as a dependency in my import section of the main.py. That doesn't work for me now because my project is not configured yet to address the correct virtual environment. This I'm gonna fix soon. I'm gonna check my project settings. Pressing file, I'm sorry the font is too small, but it's obvious where are we targeting. And now inside the file menu, I'm gonna check the project, its name Quizless, the project settings. And the most important settings is a Python interpreter. Currently, the PyCharm IDE shows me that the current project interpreter is Python 3.8, the system-wide one. I don't need this, so I press this gear button and I'm adding the new, not the new, but the existing environment. And the existing environment is already at the path I created with my virtual environment command. I believe the path is correct, so I just press OK, and that's almost it for now. I see that there is Fast API package that I installed just recently. Now I go back to my coding window and I'll check if the Fast API model important directive is not stressed with the red line any longer. It takes time, you see something on beneath of the window showing me that the files are being indexed. And now it's not red any longer. But I don't want to have my project files in the root project directory. I'll be having more stuff here. Website files, quiz data files, infrastructure as code, scripts, and so on. So I would create a new directory or a Python package, name it src. This is a Python package, so there is init.py inside. Now I want to implement the first endpoint for my Fast API application. And for this, I need some help, and I'll find this help on the Fast API project homepage. So I scroll down until I got some example. Yeah, I actually can copy this stuff, but I don't want to again have it in my main.py. Instead, I'll create a separate package, and this package, let me call it API. And inside the API package, I'm gonna have more. I will create a separate package for the endpoints definition. Now, finally, here I will create my quiz API, quiz endpoint for the quiz API. Here I have all the code, but I don't need all this code right now. I don't need this hello world. Instead, let me just return something that I could use later to test my application that resembles the API I need for the quiz website. The first endpoint is the one that returns the quiz topics. So it's simple. And let me specify the return type. Again, I'll making it async. Probably this is the preferable way of defining your Python REST APIs now with Fast API. But actually inside my method would be pretty straightforward. So far, I don't suppose any asynchronicity will appear here. The name would be, let's say, get topics, and the return value would be a dictionary, or let's say a list of dictionaries, where each dictionary describes one quiz topic, like animals, planets, etc. I love type annotations. Type annotations help me to escape from some misery when I have different expected and actual types throughout my Pythonic classes and functions. Even though some people would say that type annotations are not good in Python because the Python is not that type of language, I would not agree. Now I have the type annotations, but they are stressed with the red line because I don't have the corresponding import for this particular type. Let me add just here the list. Now the type of list is known to my IDE, but the type of dict and any is not. In PyCharm, I would use a combination of keys like Alt or Option and Enter. And here are the options. I could import this name, and this is yes, this is dict from typing. The same for any. But I won't return this particular JSON. Instead, I would return an array of topics. And let me check where I already defined the topics definition this method should return. I'm going back to my Meta board, and on this board, yes, here is a description, and here is the sample response for the quiz topics request. What I am doing, I'm just copying this response. I'm inserting in here. It looks a bit differently. That's okay for now. But these ellipses are not okay, maybe. Let me place some random stuff here we won't be using right now. I don't need this as well. Now it looks like a proper JSON-ish array, but not a proper JSON object, obviously. Before testing this API, we should declare a fast API application to include this endpoint. And I will do the following. I will create a fast API router to at least have the ability to include several endpoints in groups, in clusters in my fast API application. For now, it's just quiz, but maybe in future I'll be having more for user management, etc. If I'm going to use the API router instead of the application level for my endpoint, I should specify the router here. But I already created a fast API application. Let me instead import the API router and create this router instance here and use this instance with the very same decorator for my get endpoint. Now what I need is a fast API application that will provide this route to the end client. And I'll go back to my main.py, and instead of this import definition I don't need right now, I will import some specific stuff. First, I would import the fast API. And now that I have this fast API, let me remove this print.high. Let me remove all this stuff. Instead, I'm creating an application, and the application contains routes. I don't know if I need them. Probably I'll include router in a separate command, but I'll need a title. Let me call it quizless. And probably I'll provide the application with some service. Again, this is cool for having some automatic documentation and other stuff like this. And the service I'll describe with a JSON. And the JSON would consist of the URL of the server. Obviously, that's local URL. Just a small reminder, I don't need this stuff. I don't need this server on my AWS cloud configuration placement, because in the cloud, I'll be having a Lambda function instead of this API server. Let me have the description for this server. And this is just a local server. That's simple. And let me specify the variable the user can potentially select the value for in a dropdown. And this default option for this variable port would be like 8055 probably. That's mostly it. But now I have to add the router I configured to this fast API application with the very same command include router. And here in the api.py, I already created this API router that I'm going to use here. Again, I need the type hint. Yep. Now I need a prefix for this API, for this fast API application. And the prefix would be just API. But if I run my application now, nothing happens because there is nothing going on in this main entry point. Here I'm supposed to start a web server. FastAPI is not a web server. I need one and mine would be Unicorn. Unicorn. But before running this Unicorn server, I should install it as a dependency in my virtual environment. And let me do this simply by pip install Unicorn. Done. Now I can run it. Before I go further, let me store all the dependencies, all the virtual environment definitions, the references to the libraries I installed in a file. And this is simple. I just have to freeze my dependencies, but not here, not in the terminal. Instead, I would freeze them in the requirements, check the spelling, .txt. Now I should have this file here. Yes, here it is. I see the fast API here. I see Unicorn here. And I also see some libraries I haven't imported explicitly. Instead, these libraries are the dependencies for the libraries I installed. Now let me actually run my Unicorn server and check if API works. I need this definition, and from the Unicorn there should be a method like run. Yeah, I specify my app, and this is the entry point, and this was the module. Now I need the variable, this one storing the fast API application definition, and the host. Let the host process requests from any endpoint, but from the port 8055 as we specified earlier, and they need this extra option. This option would reload my Unicorn application in case I change one of the Python files. Might be that's not so useful for me because instead I would like to stop the application and run it again, but let's see. Now let me run it. And I see the server has started. Now let me check the link. I need this API prefix or endpoint. Not found because I'm not addressing the specific method. But if I type something like quiz topics, I got the answer. I don't like going to browser very often. Plus, we'll be having more requests and the new request would be post ones. So for the post request, I can't use my browser. I would choose Summon Postman or just Bash script, and I would prefer the Bash script. I'm going back to the command line and I'm checking serial library I'm trying to perform this very request. I'm using an extra flag to allow the command return more verbose information, to return the headers of the response, especially in case something goes wrong. Yeah, HTTP, it would be localhost, and the port 8055, and API. Finally, the specific method, quiz topics. That should be it. Yes, I got the response. Of course, it was not my final goal to create some static code to return some hard-coded value to the user. I need actual code that will be reading the quiz data. And initially we decided to store all the quiz data in S3 storage, but we don't have this S3 storage now because most probably this is for later, and the substitute for S3 would be a local file system. I'll be reading the quiz data from the local folder, and this folder name, I would call it storage. And inside probably there'll be a separate folder for the website. So for the quiz, I'm going to create a new one. And this would be just quiz, for instance. And inside I need probably separate directories for each and every quiz. Now I'm introducing a simple JSON. Probably I need a name for my quiz and let it be animal quiz. And let me have my questions here as an array. And this array, oh no, would have at least couple items to test the whole logic. So I believe my quiz would look much nicer if there is an image. And the image could be just a short reference to the file that's already stored somewhere. And also there should be some text, of course, of the question. And the answers. I had to go to Google and check which animal is actually the fastest one, but now I know the correct answer, and let us name this field correct answer, and let it be just the index of the proper answer. And definitely it's the bird, it's a hawk. So index would be 2. But finally, uh, again, you'll see the index is an array. So we might introduce a type of question that could have potentially more than just one correct answer. But for this particular question, the question type, for not to confuse our user, would be single choice. And that's it. But I'm gonna think out one more question. This question allows multiple choices, but the one I provided now is not a correct answer. The correct would be 0, the second one, the index 1, and the last one, the index number 3. This is a multi-choice question, and I believe that's enough for this particular quiz, but let us just copy and paste this JSON and maybe change some values. I just want to indicate that it's not an animal quiz, but planet quiz, let's say. And although the questions are the same, I will give them different prefixes for us to distinguish between quiz number 1 and quiz number 2. Now that I have the data, I missed the code, the actual code that will return these values to the user. But before adding the code that extracts the data from the local path and transforms the data into JSON, if extra transformation is needed, we'll have to introduce the entities, the classes we would return to the user. I don't want to implement Python code that would be dealing with plain JSON. Instead, let us map JSON onto classes, and it will be our application domain. So, as it's a domain, in the src folder, I'm adding a subfolder or Python package, name it domain, and probably directly in the domain, I'm creating a new Python file for the entity we return for the quiz topics, the quiz data. Let it be quiz data. And I'm gonna first introduce the JSON. Let it be question type or quiz question type. Enumeration that holds possible options for a question, single choice, like we already introduced it. And multiple choice. And of course, we need this enumeration module to be imported, but that's not it yet. Now I need the class for this quiz data, and this class is gonna be a data class. Let me explain in detail, but most probably you know already that a data class is something that does not need a specific constructor declaration, that you can initialize the fields of the class directly in the class itself, or at least provides type for the classes. So I'm gonna have such data like name here, and its type is string, and there would be a collection of questions. Oh, I have to define a question before I define the class quiz data. And there would be a type of the question and the image, the text, and the list of the correct answers. No, just the list of the answers first. And then another list of correct ones. And a type. But if I leave my class definition like this, these fields are not instance, but class level fields. I need instance fields to be declared this way to avoid defining the constructor like this and specifying all the fields I can pass inside the class and then assigning the class internal fields like this to the arguments. No, I don't want to do this. Instead, I want to make this quiz question a data class. It will be a data class, and the data class I would pick from data classes. I thought I would need this data class import as a library with pip package manager, but I already have it. Let me check my requirements.txt. No, there is no data classes. Probably that's something standard. And I'll be declaring now the quiz data as a collection of questions plus a name. What else I'm missing? Identifier. I need this decorator, but again, There is one little problem, and the problem is I don't want to return the user this whole data, including the answers for the questions. Probably I'll need these quiz topics in form name and identifier for the user to get some options to decide which quiz will the user play. And for this, I need just the name and identifier. Probably I'll create a new class, and this class would be quiz topic. I define a separate module, quiz topic, and I'm gonna go back and copy and paste this. Putting this in the quiz topic. Now the quiz topic would be a base class for my quiz data. And I may return only this data to the user when the user comes for the topic, without questions, of course. But that's not it yet. I want to check if I'm able to parse the JSON into this class instance. And for this reason, I'm going to check what options I have. Probably I can experiment right here. And let me try to parse this data. I already created here into the class instance. I'll call it JSON string, but it's not a string yet, and I need some escaping. I should escape, of course, quotes. Div backslash. Now I can make a multi-line string out of it. Then as I have the multi-line string, I can try parsing, but I know that this not gonna work until I introduce a bit more change. But let's try first. There is probably no such class method from JSON into data classes. And if I run it, yes, there is a failure, but I know how to add the method. What I actually need is another library named data classes JSON. And I'm not sure how this package is named. Let me call it this way and check the first link. Aha. Now I see I can copy and install the library in our virtual environment. Whatever version it be, it would be the last one probably. And now that it's installed, my packages are updated. I'm gonna add one more extra decorator to both my classes. Data classes JSON, probably. No, maybe this one. Now it's better. Now I'm checking this code and there is no highlighting around from JSON. So ideally it should work, but let's check. No, it didn't because one field was missing, ID. The problem that ID is in the folder name. ID is missing in the data itself. I don't want to repeat ID here. I can, but I don't want to. So there is one more option for me, and the option is infer missing equals to true. Let us check if I didn't forget the exact spelling. Yeah, there is a warning, and the warning says that one value for non-optional argument is missing, but even if it's missing, we were able to parse the data and to create a quiz data instance, a quiz data object with two questions inside. Now that I defined the class that could store the quiz data object, I need some manager, quiz manager, that would be probably doing all the stuff required for the quiz state transitioning and for returning the actual state of the quiz. And to create a new quiz, again, we'll be using the same class, and the same class we'll be using to get this quiz data that we read from our topics, from our folders. For this, I would go back to the domain and I would create the class I would for now call quiz manager. Probably it will eventually need some initialization. And again, most probably from the very beginning, we'll have to read all the quiz data to operate this data later on. So this initialization function would start from reading the quiz data. But I don't want to do this. I don't want to implement this quiz data reading in this particular class, quiz manager directly, because right now I'm going to read from the local file system, but later on I'm going to read from the Redis. And if I ever go for production, of course, there would be no Redis inside. There will be something different, probably a relational database manager system, or alternatively DynamoDB. Uh, But for now, again, it's just one class, and let this class be separated from the quiz manager, from the logic. For this purpose, I'm creating another package here in the domain, and this package would be repository. And in the repository, we'll be having one for now. Later on, probably more repositories for working with file systems or alternatively with S3 storage. But here is the file system repository, and I will call it metadata repository or quiz metadata repository, because this data don't gonna change often. Instead, we'll put some data in the bucket, and initially we'll put some data in the storage folder, and we won't provide the user with the opportunity of changing this data. So as soon as the data is not supposed to be changed by the user, let's call it something like metadata, and correspondingly class quiz metadata repository. And I need just one more function here that will be reading quizzes. Apparently, this function or this method will be returning the list of the quiz data objects. The quiz data we already defined. Yes, there is a nice hint suggestion, as well as for the typing list. So whatever we do next, we might define this quiz data list in advance, like quizzes. And we need something more. I'm going to refer to this storage folder. And inside there would be a quiz folder, and inside there would be quizzes. I'd like to have this data, to have this path somewhere, and I like to have it not hard-coded. Because, for instance, later we'll be having this path for S3 bucket in some data that's not hard-coded, but provided probably through the environment variable. And if we are picking data, configuration data from environment variables, the best option to store this data is a settings object. That's why I'm going back to the domain package, and here I'm creating a file that I will call just settings. And in this file, I am defining the class, again, settings, that is derived from base settings. And the base settings we would pick from the pydantic. Oh, I see already there is a prompt to input this from the pydantic base setting. Let's check. Not so sure about env settings. I wanna import this directly from the pydantic, not from the pydantic env settings. And inside this class, I'll be providing the path to the local file system, to the folder that contains the quiz data. And this folder, first, I'm gonna define somewhere because most probably the pydantic class won't help me if determining the current path. So the storage path I would get using first the path to the file, to the current file itself. But I need a bit more magic here. First, I'm going to take operation system path and real path to the file. By the way, I need to input OS. Second, I need just a directory name. I don't need the file name itself. This settings.py, there is something I don't need about it. Actually, the file name only the path to the directory, but I don't need this particular directory. src domain, I need instead the parent folder, and in the parent folder, I need the storage repository. And inside, I need the quiz repository. So I would do the following. I would redefine this storage path as this. I would join the initial path we just got, storage path. I would go one level up. Sorry, I'm inside the SRC. I don't want to be inside the domain. One level up. Oh. And then to the storage. Now I can declare a field. Let it be storage, I don't know, storage URI, because later on it would be S3 folder, S3 bucket path. And field also belongs to pydantic. And the default value is a storage path we just defined. Now I can go back to my metadata repository and provide the repository with the path of the storage that contains that quiz data. Let me read this path value. From settings. Oh, I want to also create the settings object here. It's created on the module scope, so it will be the same object for every module that imports settings. And going back, I should import this. This is the setting object I read from the RSC settings module. And here I have this storage. Not so sure why it's not shown, but let me go back and refer to it. And probably also I need the particular folder for the quiz, but not for the storage itself. I can merge the path, but let me do it in the settings. Let me introduce an ad hoc property, and this property would map the path to the quiz subfolder. It will return the same OS path join, storage path, plus the quiz. Why I'm using OS path join, but not this construction, like storage path and then quiz? Uh, this way is better because this function is smart enough to join the parts of the whole of the pieces, join them in the whole path with the proper separator. Plus, as soon as I remember, this OS path join is again smart enough to remove the trimming slashes, backslashes or forward slashes, and avoid some collisions. So I would prefer this way of gluing the path. And instead of storage URI, I'll be using this quiz path. Now I'm going to implement some trivial code that browses the source directory and reads all the content. I need to somehow extract the path name, no, the directory name from the path name, and I need to list the directories. The first task, the second one, to list the directories is simple. I could use operation system list dir for the quiz path. But I don't wanna get some extra stuff from here, like separate files. So I want to check if it's the directory, not a file. And for this, there is an option. And the option is, let me check. Now, this variable I defined contains just the directory name. It doesn't contain the full path to the directory. So I won't be able to check if it's a directory or if it's a file. It's a file by just the file name or directory name. I need the whole path. So before checking, I wanna merge this name and the root path. And the check is easy. The check is OS path is dir. No, probably underscore is not required. But again, I wouldn't do this check against the O variable. Instead, I'll be using the merged path. Again, OS path, join, and I'm joining the parent path, quiz path, and the directory name. So I need both the directory name because it contains the quiz identifier and the path to the directory to read its content. And I'm gonna return a tuple. And in this tuple, I'm gonna do the same, forgetting the whole directory name. And now the variable dir name contains the path, the name of the directory, and the dir path contains the full path. Probably we'll be having more directories here, maybe not intentionally, but if the directory name is not a unique identifier, it might not suit our needs. So I may implement an extra check here. But not now. Let me do it later on. This is not important for this particular exercise. What I'm going to do now is to read the quiz data. I'll introduce a separate function. And the separate function, let me put a placeholder here. It could be path or it could be ellipsis. The separate function for reading the quiz data will be starting from underscore because it's kind of internal one. We won't be calling this new function I'm introducing outside this module. The function would be read quiz from path. And I need this path. And probably I'll need more data, but let's see. It will return the quiz data object. So here in the calling function, I will read the quiz. I'm going to pass the directory name. Oh, sorry, directory path. And I'm going to add this to quizzes. And not forget to return this data. But before we do return, we need the implementation, and in the implementation is simple. First, we read the file. Second, we pass the file the same way we did it in the main function. Not here, not in this main, but inside the domain, inside the quiz data. We don't need this code any longer. We don't need the main at all. But they need with this code. But they need the JSON. This JSON string is one variable missing, but we'll read it from the file, and the file path we should return first. We should make first from this quiz path and the resolved file name that is quiz underscore data JSON. Again, OS path join, and inside there is quiz path, and there is quiz underscore JSON, data JSON. Now we can read the file. I'm using the function open. I would use its alternative if our question contained Unicode, some non-standard encoding, but I believe in our case it's simpler. And as I open the file stream, I'm gonna read the stream up to the end. The file is not big, that's totally okay. As I have this JSON string already, I can now parse it and return the data. But remember, we introduced this infer missing argument, and this argument tells the parsing class method to skip the missing values and initialize them with some defaults. In our case, the data that's missing is the quiz identifier, because the quiz identifier is the name of the folder itself. That's not a problem. We have this data in the caller function. So we'll introduce one more argument here, and this would be quiz ID of type string. This quiz ID is just the directory name. It's here. So quiz data is a variable we define and populate with some data, including the ID that we're going to take here. And that's it for the repository class. Now we may use the repository class in the quiz manager. Probably I'll be needing this data throughout the quiz manager functioning for each and every request. That's why I'm initializing the quiz data in the very beginning, and I'm introducing the private-like variable. Again, it starts from the underscore and it contains the list of the quiz data. And I'm reading this variable from the repository. My repository don't have arguments for now, and I will simply create the repository inline and then read quiz data. Now that I have the quizzes, I can use this data to return something meaningful, not hard-coded, from the quiz manager to finally return this data to the user in our request we already implemented. For this purpose, I'm defining the first actual method, getQuizTopics. And this method will be returning the same list of quiz. No, it will be returning the list of quiz data, quiz topics. Because we don't want to show the user the correct answers. And the questions, actually the questions before quiz started. We won't be returning quizzes. Instead, we'll return a collection of quiz topics instances, and we'll be doing this in this list operator. But we'll construct in this entity if ID equals to quiz variable ID and name from the same source. Now that's it, but we need a manager, a quiz manager somewhere. I'm not sure about where to define it, but so far I don't see anything particularly wrong about defining the quiz manager right in the module. So if it's right in the module, I can import it in our API implementation. Everything I've done before is for implementing this endpoint, get topics. So how do I get the topic data? Most probably I will call quiz manager. And in the quiz manager, I will be calling this public method get quiz topics, but it will return me the collection of objects. I want to serialize the collection of objects into a dictionary like this, or into a list of dictionaries. This is simple. I already have the topics, and the topics could be easily converted to dictionaries because each value in the topic is already a data class JSON instance, and it has a function. The function name is toDict. I believe that's it. And now I'm gonna check my endpoint because I already have a script to check it. I used to run the script before. Here is a script. I have to start my application. Do I have main? Yes, I do. Now internal server error. Let's fix the error. That's something completely unexpected. Let's check what was happening. And the quiz topic object has no attribute to dict. That's a bit weird. Let's go back to the quiz topic. Maybe I'm missing one definition. And actually I do. This is data class JSON definition that I should add here as well. And I should copy the import. Now let me repeat the test. Yes, I got the response, and the response contains what I expected. Quiz name, quiz ID, quiz name, quiz ID. Now let me remind you that in our API implementation, this request, get quizzes, is the only one that is declared with the get method specifications. The rest of the requests are post requests, and the post request will probably update some data, update some state, but we don't store the state in the storage. Storage is not for the state. Storage is for metadata, and for the state we'll be using Redis. I haven't installed Redis yet, but I'm gonna do this soon. The problem is even even though I do have Redis locally, I don't want to use the Redis on my local machine. I want to introduce a separate and an isolated testing and debugging environment for this quiz. So I need to find a way to install Redis plus minus the same in the same manner. I installed already the dependencies for the project using pip and virtual environment. But in case of Redis, it won't be just package manager. We need a service. We need an operation, a daemon in the operation system. Obviously, the answer is Docker. I will create a Docker, not a Docker file, but a Docker Compose file to be able to run the Docker container with the Redis instance. And of course, there is already a Redis container, the Redis image specification somewhere in the Docker public registry that I can use easily for my needs without extra configuration and programming. I'm gonna need a specification for the Redis, the version probably, and I'm gonna remember the structure of the Docker Compose YAML, but I might be wrong somewhere, so I don't want to experiment right now. Let me just create the empty file, docker compose.yaml, and there would be services inside. Probably the one I will call Redis. But let me go now for ChatGPT for some answers. And the question is this. I need to run a Redis service in a Docker Compose YAML with as less code as possible. Let me check. I believe there would be something really simple. And that's it. Let me try. No. So I would run it with docker compose app.d, docker compose -d, and let's check. Yes, that's okay. But now I'm going to check if Redis is accessible. I already have Redis CLI. If I don't have, I could install it easily. And the host will be a local host, and the port would be default Redis port 6379. The connection is refused. Most probably there is something about the port because I do not expose this port here. There should be something like ports. 6379 and 6379 again. But I should first Docker Compose down and repeat. And let me check Redis CLI. Now it's okay. I do have Redis and it was extremely easy. But might be you don't feel comfortable with these commands, Docker Compose up, Docker Compose down. So the alternative for us is to create a make file. In the make file, I'm gonna implement this start command, and the start means actually Docker Compose up detached, and the stop command for Docker Compose down. Also, I would list this start and stop command with this funny special command inside here, because actually everything in a make file initially is supposed to be a file. So if I ever have the files with names start and stop inside this quiz list directory, there would be a conflict. To avoid this conflict in advance, I would list the commands here in funny. So I already started Redis. Let me try stopping it. Make stop. There is something that I'm missing. I need 8 spaces exactly. 8 spaces. No. Of course, it happened to me before, and now the problem is I need tabs, not spaces. But introducing a tab here is not an easy task. So probably my IDE won't allow me adding a tab symbol. Instead, I would go and find and replace the tab symbol, the special character with tab. No, that's not gonna work. I don't need a special syntax. What I needed are just tab symbols, and I just copy and paste these tab symbols from somewhere else, because in PyCharm it's not an easy task to type tab. Now I have tabs, and I want to check if I'm able to execute this make command. Yes, it worked. Now that I have Redis on my side, I would implement a Redis repository in the same manner I did it for the local file system repository. So eventually we might want to replace this Redis repository with something else, let's say for accessing a relational database manager, or maybe DynamoDB. Now this repository would be a Python module with name quiz. Let's call it quiz state repository because it actually stores the state. And the repository will operate with Redis through a special class through the library I haven't imported yet. Most probably I will just install pip redis package. Let's see if it works. Now let me check if I'm able to declare a Redis client here. Let's import Redis. And for the Redis, I first and foremost need the host. The host, let's read it from settings. We haven't imported settings yet, but here they are. And let it be Redis host. We don't have Redis host yet. We have to define it. And it would be a field, simple field Redis host. By default, its value would be local host. Let's go back. Also, we need probably port. I believe the port would be a default one, but just in case, if something will be different in our AWS cloud configuration, let's define port as well. It's not a string any longer. Now that we have the client, I want to check the client. I want to check if it works, and I'm gonna create this small test. The name of the key would be test Redis key. The value would be 42. And let's get this by Redis key get. Let's print it. The answer is red. Now we can use Redis, and probably we'll be implementing more methods for our API, and we'll be implemented this method inside this quiz manager domain class.